Hi folks, we're Tassless today. Tassless today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio no pictures live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about some views that are ping-ponging around the internet about the demographics, how the demographics will play out in the West over the next 50 years or so, and what parallels with the past, the mass migrations of the past, such as the mass migrations to the New World and to North America, Australia, South America, and so on. And what are the demographic makeups, the racial mixing makeups of those societies, and what can that tell us about the possibility of the future? Are there any parallels between those mass migrations or large-scale migrations and the population mixing that subsequently occurred and over the time frame it occurred? Now, there's a YouTuber that focuses on studies and explores and does videos on demographics, and I think he's from the Czech Republic, and he's called Kaiser Bausch, and if you haven't had a look at his work, it's certainly worth going through some of his videos. So Kaiser Bausch, head on over there if you're not aware of it. Now, he did a video recently, I think within the last week or so, where he looked at or used an example of Brazil as being a possible guide to what might happen to Western societies given the mass migration that's going on. So I just want to talk about or have a look at this subject more widely. Now, the views are that within a decade or two, white people will be a minority in every white West, or what was once white Western countries. So white people will be there will be a single country in the world, unless it's some tiny place like, I don't know, Iceland or somewhere. There will not be a single country in the world where white people are in the majority. This is put forward by the globalists and the World Economic Forum and their stooges and goons and liars and propagandists. This is put forward as an unalloyed good. It's beyond dispute. And if you think it won't be a good, or even you question the possibility of it being 100% good, then you are a Nazi, a fascist, you are Hitler, a racist, a bigot, yada, yada. So clearly you don't get that insecure denouncing people when they ask questions. You explain why it's going to be good, how it's going to be good, how it will deliver better standards of living or higher, more productive societies, or say, that'll be, but they don't. Instead, they just call you a Nazi if you question. So clearly, it's not a good and never will be a good. So, but nonetheless, let's have a look at the possibilities now. Given the technology, the movement of people at the time, and so on, are places like the United States, say pre 1900. Or even pre the industrial era, really, or Brazil, are any of these places really going to be a useful guide? I suppose it's possible. We don't know the trajectory, but that modern migration will take. I mean, if the migration of black and brown people into the Western world continues at the current rate, and given the surplus populations in the places like the Middle East, like India, or the Indian subcontinent generally, and like Africa, given those massive surplus populations, if the current rate, more or less, continues of migration, then in another 100 years, white people would be lucky to be even 10% of the population. So it's really going to depend on how sustained the mass migration is going to be. If it continues at current level, again, white people will, over the next 100 years, will almost cease to exist. They'll be like 2 or 3% of the population. So in what were once 100% white countries, or 90+% white countries, or 100% in the case of, say, places like Germany or whatever. So that's one possibility, if assuming current rates of mass migration, indeed the source of those mass migrants. Again, there's the two primary places where there's massive surplus populations are Africa and the Indian subcontinent. So if you're going to look at where the mass migrants are coming from, they'll come from there. Now, there are other scattered sort of situations where you could say that the Philippines is overpopulated relative to the economic size and economic opportunities. So that's a possibility. You'll get some from there, but nowhere near the numbers that you'll get from Africa and the subcontinent, so Indian subcontinent. So bear in mind that just in the Indian subcontinent alone, just that, there are more than 1 billion people. 1 billion people who want to get the fuck out, and they're desperate to get out, and their governments are keen to get rid of them. And where do they want to go? They don't want to go to the neighbouring country they want to go to that rich streets paved with gold white west, because they want to go there to take. We're coming to take. They're not there to give or to share, but to take. And so you've got just the subcontinent alone, there is more than 1 billion people. Now, over the next 35, 40 years, there's roughly an equivalent number of black Africans that want to get the fuck out of Africa. And they too, they're coming to take. They're not coming to give or to share, but to take. So you've got over the next 35 odd years, there will be 2 billion with a B, 2 billion people that want to come to the West. So that's going to well over double the Western population just over the next 35 years if those people continue to come at the current rate, and indeed if that rate accelerates, which given the sort of lines and the nonsense and the propaganda that's coming out of the mouths of the World Economic Forum and the Davos and the globalist cabal, they have every intention of increasing mass migration beyond its current rate. So this idea that there's going to be a sort of a hardcore 35-40% white population and then a mixed population and then a minority black or brown population that's genetically cohesive at sort of the other end of the scale, I don't think that's going to happen at all. So let's again look at this wider issue. Let's suppose mass migration was to stop today, just bang, stop, which it won't, but let's suppose that mass or migration would convert to a skills-only migration. That would pretty much mean in the first world countries, only white people would move around, or pretty much. I mean, you'll get a small cohort, but that's pretty much what, and that's not what the globalists want. So, but if that were to occur, then the current and the illegal migrants out of whether it be Britain or the United States or anywhere would be expelled and go back to their home countries where they're at liberty to improve their own countries rather than come and parasite off the rich West, then that too would have a major effect on how the demographics would play out. But let's look at say how the migration system was working. Say after World War II, Australia got a real shock that there was going to be invaded by the Asian hordes, a numerically superior Japan that was talking about a Asian co-prosperity sphere where all the land in Asia belonged to the Asians and this sort of thing. Something that was taken up by other Asian nationalists really in various forms, such as Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore and Mahathir in Malaysia and so on. So and even expounded in various indirect ways by Mao Zedong in China. So the Australian government, which was Anglo, 98%. Anglo-Saxon, decided to say, well, we have to populate, we've got to bring migrants in. And as long as they were either white and or Catholic, Christian, European, then they dropped the standards for a while. So they brought in a lot of rural illiterate Greek and Italian peasants, that sort of thing. And they've integrated very slowly. Even third generation Greeks now still only just fourth generation, even only just integrating. So it was a slower process. You still find third generation Greeks and Italians still marrying each other, as in other Italians or other Greeks. So they tended to form sub societies to a large extent. They weren't against the state, and they weren't, you know, openly hostile to Australia or the government, you know, these sorts of things. But the integration was relatively slow, and there are still Italians that after 20 years, they, you know, some Italian people that I know. I used to, well, I was rusty now, but I used to speak passable Spanish, so I could kind of talk to Italians in their own language, or just about. And they said that it was very easy to not even have to speak English at all. They could work for, you know, they had jobs like labourers or concreters, or, you know, that type of stuff. And they had or bricklayers. They had there was always Italian companies that they could go and work for, where the supervisor or the foreman or the boss or whatever was Italian, so they could go and work for them. They could go to Italian shops where they only had to speak Italian. They could go to neighbourhoods where most of the people were Italian, and they formed, I wouldn't say ghettos necessarily, but certainly, like, I'm thinking of a thing where this guy used to live, and he barely spoke a word of English, but he lived in a street where 2, 3, you know, out of, say, just in that strip where the odd, you know, the 25 odd houses were there, probably 7 were Italians, and they just hung around together, those people, and spoke Italian to each other. They didn't really mix outside of that. The only times they would not be in a sort of an Italian environment was if they went to, say, the grocery chain store or something like that. And again, they always knew someone, you know, like the Italian mechanic, and so. But they did eventually, you know, as they had children and then grandchildren, they did drift into the wider community. Something you don't see with Indians, by the way. They still stay very tightly in their own genetic diaspora. Now, but most of the people coming over, not all, but most of the people coming to Australia in the migrant thing, there were standards of, you had to have. And this particularly began to sort of, you know, into the 1960s, it began to sort of tighten up a bit, where there was a focus on skills, or a greater focus on skills, and whether you could speak the language. So if you look at, say from 1965, a ship's, you know, the immigrant, the passenger manifest, if you like, and you would see people who were carpenters, you know, tradespeople, architects, nurses, and you know, accountants, and you know, various. Everyone seemed to have, pretty much everyone seemed to have a skill. Now they're offsetting. Say you didn't have a skill, but you had a large family, you had 6 children or something, then that was okay, because you get a lot of kids which could be socialized into the system, even though you may not have a skill, like you weren't a lawyer or a doctor, or you know, I don't know, plumber or something. So there was that, but a very different sort of crowd coming in, that pretty much everybody during the, say, 1965 into even the early 70s, there was a very high number of skilled people that were coming in, as opposed to just people. And most of those people were white. If they weren't white, they were light brown, such as Italian, and they were Christian anyway. So, you know, that type of thing. So there was still quite a high rate overall of integrate. People really useful to the economy, as in, even if they didn't speak English, they were concreters or bricklayers or something like that. And could go work for companies that could use their skills or capabilities. So language wasn't an issue, or they all were well qualified and spoke English and came from Britain and so on. In fact, one of the slogans that Australia had in the 60s was, in terms of migration, bring out of Britain to Australia. So they were really encouraging the British and the Northwest Europeans to come to Australia. And so I went for a short while. I went to a multiracial school, and in an area that was close to like migrant centres, you know, hostels, and you know, housing for sort of the mass migrants, so they had somewhere to live and get something to eat while they were looking for a job or something. Now, I've noticed the mass migrants from the third world peasants coming to Britain get incredibly better treated than those skilled people in Australia did in the 1960s. They were housed in these big dormitories, you know, and they were fed and they had a bed to sleep in and you know, all that sort of stuff. And they're interpreters there, and they could go out and look for work. And when they got a job and had a regular income, they were free to leave and go out on their own, this sort of stuff. No. But the emphasis was you need to find a job. Now, when we look at the claims today, if you look at the people coming into the West today, you know, as much as there's propaganda allegations, they're all rocket scientists. You know, we all know that that's absolute rubbish. And again, if mass migration was so good, you wouldn't need to tell this many lies about it. If it's so good, you could just say, look how good it is. But they can't, and so they have to tell lies that all these people are rocket scientists when in fact they're illiterate third world peasants who've never had a job and have no qualifications, and they can't do a thing other than make trouble or go around stabbing people or something like that. So anyway, they come into the sort of people that are coming into the West are unattractive sexual partners or marriage partners to the currently Indigenous population, or to populations coming from other diasporas. For example, the Asians and the Indians view the Black Africans as being a subhuman race almost. So there's unlikely to be any marriage, cross marriage in there. The child, you're just unlikely to see it. You see a little bit of I remember all the times I've been to England, including recently, I can't think of a single time when I saw a mixed race relation, like as in black and white or something. There must have been, but I don't remember seeing it. I remember being there on business and was in a fairly upmarket bar, like on Friday evening after work, and there was this very well turned out, quite hot black chick. And there are a few white guys coming onto her, but she looked more like a hooker than anything else. So where is the integration going to come from? The Indian states stick very much within their diaspora, and the Asians and Chinese, they too stick very much within their genetic diaspora. There is some bleed across into Asians marrying white people. But not that much. There's some, but not very much. And the preference again is to marry a rich white guy. But there's not many rich white guys, and the rich white guys, for the most part, will prefer other white partners. So there's not much. There's some, but there's not much there. Where is this racial integration going to come from, particularly given that a lot of these mass migrants can bring out family members? Indians, for example, are almost fanatical about going back to the village of their ancestors to select brides. They're not intermarrying. If they were denied that, then there possibly would be some intermarriage going, but until they're denied that, that's not going to happen. Similarly for Chinese or Asians, I've noticed how many Chinese send back for brides as well. Even Chinese people who I would say were reasonably westernized, they still do it, and there's a lot of family pressure on them to do that. So even people from the Philippines do that as well. There's a much higher rate of them sending back for brides and husbands than there is for them marrying Anglo-Saxons, for example. The Filipinos similarly don't want to marry black guys or black women. So blacks seem to be the least desirable partners to all the racial categories that are coming into the West. The Indians don't want it, the Pakistanis don't want it, and so on and so on. So you're looking at a very small pool across marriage. Now, this is very different to the how things would have worked in the 19th century. Where getting people, moving, when mostly the people arrive, and earlier even than that, most of the people going into these New World areas, whether it be South America, North America, where most of these people, there was a real shortage of the people who are going were pioneers, men, and there was a shortage of women. So in South America, for example, there was an artificial intermixing with the local native populations, and where white Western men were procreating with local native women. And also where the white people held all the power, the money, the influence, the prestige. So it was a prestigious thing to fuck a white guy, or to be selected by him as a partner, as there were then people who were mixed race. For example, I've known South Americans who claim that they're 25% local Indian, and you can kind of see it, but only just. So they could easily pass for white. So as that proportion of mixed race increased, then the amount of intermarrying increased. At the time, it became economic and worthwhile for just the ordinary sort of person to bring out a bride or a husband from Europe. Then the intermarriage and the interracial activity had already taken place. So it was very much relative to the pioneering people men that went there, and the cost and the aggravation, the drama of bringing people out. Also, many invitations from these men went to the New World, went back to Europe, but the women and their families are going, I don't really want to go out there. That's a long way from anything. It's expensive to get there, and how do I know I'm not going to be eaten by cannibals and so on? So it was a real selling job for some of these men to convince these European women to come out, and not that many in the overall scheme of things did. Now, where you got whole families transplanting, as they did in certain places, then the interracial mixing was much lower. So it's very much circumstances, cost, expediency, and so on that was deciding how much the interracial relationships took place. If men are denied their preferred partners, then eventually they'll take whatever they can get, and that's where the interracial stuff comes in. Now, if you look at, say, the interracial mixing of black and white people in the United States, other than bed wenches and things like that were going on in say the slave states, but outside of that, you look at the black population is behaves and lives the same sort of life attitudes that they still do in Africa today. So over 400 odd years, their attitudes to behaviour and community interaction are almost the same as they were and still are in Africa. And again, I noticed in the United States that certainly black women that I met there in offices and so on, they pretty much universally, I don't think I came across one that didn't think this. The black women would say their preferred partner is a white guy. He's got more money. He's better behaved. He's this sort of thing. So I don't think there was ever a black woman I spoke to that didn't want a white guy as a partner. But the white guys didn't want the black chicks as the partners. They may fuck them, but they didn't want to marry them or procreate with them. So now you do get some bleed across, but not very much. So unless there's laws forcing people to procreate and marry black partners, and I wouldn't put that beyond the possibility of the globalist authoritarian machine to be considering that this very minute. But unless there are laws to force it, then I don't see the black population to any appreciable extent integrating with, in racial and demographic terms, integrating with any other source of people, whether it be the whites or the people from the subcontinent. Now, coming back to the numbers, or coming now to numbers, there are claims that 25 years ago, only 2% of the population was mixed race integrating through marriage, but now in Britain, for example, it's supposed to be around 7%. But when you look at the numbers here and how they calculate the numbers, and you've got to drill down a bit, they're getting a little bit adventurous and I would say deceitful and duplicitous with the numbers. Because if a Polish, living in England, if a Polish person marries a Ukrainian person, they're saying that's a mixed race marriage. and that's bullshit. If it's especially Polish people from around that Ukrainian border or Ukrainians from near the Polish border, they probably speak the same language or enough of it. They're both Christian, they're both white, and they could walk around in the, down in any wide area downtown. You wouldn't know that they were from another country. So, and also where, a Scottish person marries an English person, that's a mixed race marriage. Or somebody from Nigeria marries somebody from, Ghana or something like that, then that's a mixed race relationship, and on it goes. So the reality is that the actual mixed races, meaning genetically different mixtures, that's simply not happening. It's happening at a tiny scale. It wouldn't even be 1%. And I say that in Australia, where in the areas that have the highest rate and were the very first areas to be blessed with racial diversity, enriched by racial diversity, the very first areas. You go and sit in the shopping centre there on a Saturday morning, and you look around. You sit there for 10 minutes, or however long, it doesn't matter. You sit there and you look at how many mixed race relationships that you see, as in genetically mixed race. Now, there are some that are maybe a little bit tougher to pick. For example, a very Chinese-looking Filipino with a not so Chinese-looking Manchurian. So I may not be able to pick that first off, and that's mixed race. Well, I suppose technically it is, but not really. They're from that same Asian racial diaspora, and it's the same as an English. Somebody from England marrying someone from Scotland. It's not mixed race in any meaningful sense. So how will it go? I think the way that the demographics will go is that the Indian diaspora, or the Indian subcontinent, which includes like Pakistan, Bangladesh, that sort of thing, and the Muslim diaspora, I don't think they'll cross marry or integrate racially at all. There are some women who are willing to convert to Islam, and you see that in Australia, but again, a very small number, white women, that is. So I don't think there's going to be interracial mixing with Islam. I don't think there's going to be interracial mixing with the Indian subcontinent. Again, 5th, 6th, 7th generation Indians are still sending back to India for husbands and brides, even today, for goodness sakes. That's 5th, the 6th, 7th generation Western born, incidentally. So they want to keep the culture and the gene pool really fresh, and they're absolutely adamant on that. So I don't think they'll be into me. Again, there might be some outliers, but as a rule, I don't think it'll occur. When you look at places like Fiji, where you look at what's the interracial mixing in Fiji, between Indians and local Fijian islanders, and the interracial mixing is minuscule. And the Indians have been there in large numbers for 160, 170 years, and still they're not interracially mixing. And the Indians believe themselves to be a superior, morally, spiritually, and otherwise superior to the local Fijians. So there's no real mixing there. And the Indians have this wherever they go, by the way. They fancy themselves as the morally and spiritually superior ones. Why the fuck should they integrate or have intermarriage? So I don't believe there's going to be any there. The blacks again are perceived as the least quality partners. There's some white women I know, when they were college kids and they were all carried away with not wanting to appear racist, and the best expression of not being a racist was to go and marry a black guy and have kids with him. That all the ones I know, they all bitterly regret doing it. The black guys are lazy, won't work. They'll stay in bed till 11 o'clock. They drink too much. They don't behave well. They've always trying to get mistresses on the side. And this type of stuff. Coming home with all sorts of diseases and the like. So they bitterly regret it. So I just don't think the black diaspora is going to be considered as desirable partners. Now they're always outliers. There was a guy I know who was he was like a professional bodybuilder, this black guy, professional bodybuilder, and he's all roided out, and he had a lot of white chicks, like basic lower working class white chicks that wanted to marry him. People like strippers and pole dancers, that sort of thing. And so he had a lot, and I think he did end up marrying a white chick, but I don't think that lasted very long, by the way. But he's again very rare outlier. So I don't think there will be that integration. But so will the white diaspora? So the white diaspora will still marry amongst themselves, and I think the procreation rate will decline. Certainly, the white people I know that are thinking of having children are looking at the way the Western world is going, how we're going to be swamped with third world peasants and so on. They think, well, I don't want, and how white people, especially white men, are viewed as being, they're all Hitlers and they have to be taught a lesson and this sort of stuff. So they're looking at think, well, why would I have white couples? Why would we have children? We're just going to offer up another sacrifice to be humiliated by the globalists purely on the basis that he's white and male. So unless we can convince him to become trans and identify as a black lesbian or something, he's fucked. He's screwed. His life is destroyed before it begins due to this insane period of globalization we're going through. That's being forced upon us, by the way. Mass migration being the key and basic component of that. So I think mass migration will continue, and it'll be a mass peasant migration, because that's all you can get from those places, the subcontinent and Africa, and affirmative action keeps all the jobs, and the glory and the prestige and the handouts will all go to these people, not to the indigenous white population, which will further discourage procreation amongst the white population. So I think mass migration will reduce the white population to a tiny proportion of the total. So we're talking, Britain could have, for example, 150 million people in 50 years' time, 60 years' time, 100 years' time. And of those 150 million, maybe only 20 million will be white. I think it'll go along those lines, with an ever-decreasing proportion of the total being the white. Now, will the other groups mix? And I don't think so. I don't think there'll be much mixing at all. It'll be around the 1%. 5% maximum will be the mix of the real genetic cross race marriage and procreation, and I think just the Indian diaspora will become, and the black diaspora will become the bigger majority, simply because they'll be the source of the mass migration, and I don't think there'll be any intermixing of any substance at all. I think that's the way or the likelihood it's going to go. The only breaks or preventions to that are that mass migration stopped instantly, and all other migrants, illegal migrants, are expelled. Migrants that can't speak English after a certain time should be expelled, and so on and so forth. So eventually you're left with migrants in the West who want to be there, who want to work, want to contribute, who want to become part of the society, and in that way normality can be restored. Now, the globalists will put up a vicious fight to stop this, but I think it's the only thing that's going to save Western society. Beyond that, in 200 years' time, white people may not even exist. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.